Search. Waiting to get this going. Let's see how the light is. Happy Friday, everybody.
Hello.
There we are.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me okay?
Very good.
Awesome. Now I can hear you just fine. I'm actually working on headphones today because I rewatched last week and I was like, oh, hey, Dorota. And I watched back last week and I just realized my sound was kind of echoing off the laptop. So hopefully this sounds okay. Right on. Yeah. Yeah.
You need to
How's
get
your
yourself one of these mics. I think it kind of helps with the echo stuff, but we'll see.
Yeah, I gotta make things official. Or maybe I should just get one of those like actual microphones, like I'm hosting a late night show with
Yes. Well, if you do that, then I'm gonna have to do that too. So
Yeah.
just let me know. We need to start scouring Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji or something.
Yeah, and it can be an official and it could be official podcast.
So, and I guess we should probably tell everyone that we sort of want to make this somewhat of a thing for now. You know, this is a 4-part series. Of course, it would be nice to hear from people if there's like things related to health and fitness that they want to know more about, and they can ask us, and you know, we can sort of talk about
Anything, really. Like I had shared a picture earlier this week, well, kind of like telling a short glimpse into my history, into like how I got this far in fitness and me navigating through the industry. And it all started because I had been overweight for some time. So speaking about weight loss and how exercise definitely was a huge part of me being able to lose all of that weight, and maybe other people have their own stories or their own topics they would want to hear from us with regards to that or nutrition. I'm a huge fan of like Lane Norton's nutrition book. You have it as well. Yeah, so like so
fat
many things
loss
that we
forever.
can, yeah, so many things that we can go over. But today is about posture.
Yes, yes, and I think it's 12 now, so I think we should get rolling now. I do want to say before I let you start running with it, I would love for you to take the lead on this. I have some notes that I made that I think we both sort of went over and agree on. Like these are important talking points because, as you said, like if you're going on about it, you're going to be able to talk for so long. This is kind of something that's um, I don't know, would we say like near and dear to you, or that you're passionate about?
Well, I have to integrate it in all of my clients. Like I have to, a lot of my clients, they're kind of the corporate clientele. They're always worried about their posture. So it's something that we definitely talk about a lot. And I do factor it in when it comes to program design, when I'm designing exercise programs and exercise prescriptions and such. It is a huge factor and it can be very complex. There's so much to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people don't realize that it's just a snapshot of what a person's capacity actually is. So on one end, we kind of hold it as like, oh, my posture's so bad, but like people mistakenly take that into thinking that they can't have all of these movement options available to them. So it's really understanding posture. Like posture is definitely important, especially a lot of us are working from home these days, and we do need to be aware of it. But I think it's only just a small part of what everyone needs to consider when it comes to moving better and being healthy in general.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Okay. So then the format for everybody who's watching and for anyone who's going to tune in later on, it's going to look something like this. We're going to start with a sort of a conceptual definition of posture. sort of what it is, what's involved in it, just so we understand, okay, here's our working definition, so everyone is on board and can follow along with how we're the approach that we're taking. We're going to address a couple of major myths surrounding posture, and I'm not going to give anything away just yet. And then we're going to finish off with a couple of questions that we've received from people, but it's also stuff that we've experienced, like just having been doing this and being around it for so long, where you sort of get into a pattern and you're hearing people ask the same question all the time. And I think this would be a good place to address it, so that if it comes up again, you know, here's a video, here's a link to it, it's discussed there. So without further ado, why don't we start with that sort of conceptual definition or working definition of posture? How would you, if I came to you as a client and I said, you know, how can I understand posture? My posture is bad. Everyone's talking about posture, but what exactly is it?
For sure. So posture, as I mentioned before, it is just a glimpse. It is a snapshot, a preview into how that into what those persons, how the person organizes themselves against their external stimuli or their environment. So it's dependent on how you sit, how long you sit, genetics are involved, and it's a relationship between how your muscles and joints interact with one another. So we typically identify bad posture as, like, you know, the extra kyphosis, right? Where a person's really got the rounded shoulders and their head is sticking forward, and it's definitely less than ideal. I also posted a video on this earlier in the week, just managing office posture. So I think that's kind of what people typically understand is what bad posture is, but bad posture can exist in more ways than that. I remember I don't know why I did this, but in high school, like, I reclined the seat as I was driving, and, you know, all that really does is just promote cervical extension. So again, that's not ideal. So for simplicity's sake, we'll just kind of keep any reference to how we sit at the desk. So that's how we identify poor posture, with the kyphosis, and the head is, the neck is in cervical extension and it's sitting forward, and the shoulders are collapsing in on one another. There is a lot that goes into a person's posture, as I mentioned, so genetics and its exposure to the person's environment. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is how a person breathes is a huge contribution to a person's posture. If a person doesn't have, so the rib cage, for example, can move front to back, side to side, pump handle versus bucket handle mechanisms. When we have too much pump handle, for example, right, the person's back is arching, and then they just kind of have this posture where they stay like that because they breathe like that all the time. So what people may not realize is that how you breathe can also dictate your posture, not just how you sit, not just your genetics or your environment. It's how you breathe can also dictate your posture too.
So can you just tell me real quick about the difference between pump handle and bucket handle?
Yeah, so if you look at the rib cage, so I guess you can kind of pretend this is my rib cage. The sternum, when you breathe in, so let's say you're looking at a person from the side, their side profile.
Yeah.
As a person breathes in, the sternum especially, like if you think of like a pump handle when you're pumping water, okay,
right.
Rib cage normal mechanics should externally rotate, internally rotate. So open, close, inhale, exhale. Okay, and bucket handle is just kind of how a bucket handle would move on the sides. That's the base of your rib cage here. So as you inhale, you get the bucket handle, and then as you exhale, it should close. What I find on a lot of clients who are heavily stressed, they're in this exhaled state. Yes. Where they lack proper inhalation. So as a compensation, the body will increase that bucket handle in the front, right? And they have this flared rib cage at the bottom. Their back is too extended, and they just stay like this. They're stuck, right? And then you can have other compensations layered on top of that. So it can get really complicated. What came first, the chicken or the egg? But usually what I find is when I resolve a person's breathing patterns and just teach them proper respiratory mechanics and resolve all those issues at the rib cage, the posture improves without doing any of the typical, chin tucks or thoracic extensions. Thoracic extensions in that case would be the last thing that they need, right? So it's figuring out what they need first, and it's usually breathing first, and then pieces falling in after that.
The other stuff on top of it. And I want to say something to that, and just to sort of your comment about the chicken or the egg. My approach to it with regards to breathing, especially because I usually start with my new clients. I'm like, look, let's figure out your breathing first, because if you're not breathing properly, if you will, you're not going to be doing anything properly. And that's a great point that I want to pick up on with what you said. So, you asked what came first, the chicken or the egg, and I typically, like my son, when he's sleeping, it's like natural, that sort of bucket handle breathing technique, if you will, seems to be innate. Like, we do that. But then you also mentioned how with some of your clients, you're noticing a lot, if they're constantly stressed, they have more of that pump handle mechanic. And that's sort of one of the first things I tell them, is that usually you see people breathing, or we've sort of learned to start breathing with the chest more in that pump handle, because we're constantly under high amounts of stress, whether it's anxiety or panic. And like, whenever you see somebody who's scared, panicking, or anxious, it's always like breathing up here, right? And then you're kind of caught in that, and we don't think enough about how every single one of those breaths, right, you're using muscles to make that happen. You're essentially doing a rep every single time you breathe, right?
25,000 of them daily.
So that's insane. So you're basically doing that, for the average person, if they're taking that many breaths, and most of them are coming from that pump handle, it's like, okay, you're breathing, you're getting your oxygen, but like at what expense? What is the result of that? What kind of posture are you encouraging by constantly being pulled into that position?
So I should backpedal a little bit, because even some people can be missing the pump handle, and there's no, like, your chest, like, everything should expand even at the chest, right? So everything should expand 360-degree fashion. So if you kind of envision the rib cage looking down, bird's eye view, you want to see that rib cage expand in all directions. And especially with that stress, they're not even only keeping it shallow, the whole rib cage is elevating up and down instead of that 360-degree expansion. So you get a lot of neck tightness, and they just can't use their diaphragm properly. That's like, I think when people ask me what's the weakest muscle in the body, diaphragm. For sure, because we get so much of this and not breathing down, which create that expansion,
and that it's not that it's that sort of what you're saying, if I understand it right, not that pump handle breathing is bad, but if that's all you're doing sort of most of the day, all day, every day, then that's going to start creating or contributing to some issues with posture. Maybe, right?
Yes, it does. It promotes, like, if the rib cage is constantly flaring at the bottom and you're only getting this to breathe in, you're just promoting thoracic extension, and you're just staying in that extended state. That's fatiguing your back muscles. And then if this is all your body knows, right, and you can't flex, when you actually go to flex, you got an issue. That's where like you can get pain and you can tweak something. I've known a client to say they threw their back out because they went down to pick up a piece of paper on the floor.
Yeah.
And it was just like, and game over.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's a huge thing then to consider about how breathing can affect the postures. And sort of like you said, you're doing 25,000 breaths a day. That's essentially like 25,000 reps a day.
So if you're breathing dysfunctionally, if you're doing this, like mouth breathing, that's a whole other, maybe we should cover mouth breathing in a few weeks, but
we should do a whole thing on breathing itself. I feel like,
because like with a new client that I get that has like a lot of issues with like back pain, like our first few sessions is only breathing, then core, then a layer on top of that. But like imagine those 25,000 reps, those 25,000 breaths you take in a day, and it's all this.
Right. Right.
Like, obviously I'm exaggerating to demonstrate a point,
Sure.
but it's dysfunctional, and then it weakens the core because the oblique muscles especially become more approximated. They are at a mechanical disadvantage to help support your trunk. So we want
So
to correct that.
so then to what extent would you say like genetics are involved in posture?
So everybody has structural differences, you know, so bony landmarks and anatomical structural differences, everybody's got different. So to make a standard in terms of how a person's pelvis should sit, like should these muscles be in alignment, one person's bony alignment is not going to be the same as someone else's, you know what I mean? So we can kind of approximate what posture should look like, but we still have to tailor it individually because there are structural differences from person to person.
And that's a great point to make when you sort of also relate it to, you know, structural differences of the skeleton.
Right.
Should also take into consideration on how that affects the muscles, right? So your muscle, one person's skeleton might look different than another's, and in that sense, their muscle attachments, origins, insertions are also going to look different as a result of that, right?
Yeah. Some people have longer femurs. Men versus women. Women have greater pelvises, they therefore greater acute angles. Like, it makes a difference in terms of what their posture presentation might be compared to somebody else. So to make comparisons across multiple people in a population is hard. So when assessing someone's posture, it's individualized. You got to look at the individual and what they're presenting.
Where do you think, like, this is sort of not too off topic, but a bit related. Where do you sit on this sort of idea that, you know, how fascia also can affect things like posture? So if anyone hasn't heard the term fascia, fascia is a very thin line of tissue that pretty much covers the entire body. And we used to think, or scientists used to think, oh, it's just, you know, a little bit of tissue that helps muscles glide and stuff. But now we're learning a lot more about how it's actually a giant neural net, and it receives and processes information to and from the brain. And certain things that can do, like stress, can have an impact on that, where it causes the fascia to sort of start tightening up around the body over time. And that idea of, you know, whatever position you're in the most is the one that you're always going to default to. So, for example, with everybody sitting on Zoom and doing a lot more meetings, you can't help it. Over time, you kind of start to slump forward because, I don't know, the core gets tired, the upper back gets tired, you get tired, you just want to like be in that, drop into that position.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that constantly, how does that affect then your day to day, you know, like, you know, being in this position at the same time trying to like pump handle, breathe, it really sort of suffocates you. And just thinking about it, it's like, man, it's almost setting you up for more anxiety and panic attacks because you're not able to breathe properly, right?
Right. So sorry, there was a lot in there. What is exactly your question?
Yeah, sorry, my bad. I tend to do that. Basically, like, what is your thought on how fascia is related to posture? That sort of.
Oh man.
Without getting too much into it, if we just sort of consider fascia as this giant neural net that responds to how you're feeling. So if you're feeling stressed, it's going to tighten up and it's going to get you in that like tight position, and that's going to affect your breathing, and that's going to affect your posture.
Right. So fascia is still being studied, and there's still a lot of, you know, the jury is still out in terms of like the importance of fascia and the role of it, especially when it comes to posture. I know when people foam roll, I know especially when foam rolling first came out, it was still kind of a new science and a new thing. And we would just kind of foam roll the fascia and loosen things up, so to speak. But really, position is going to dictate everything. The position of the joints, the position of your pelvis, the position of your rib cage. Like, there's always a reason something is tight, right? So I think we've kind of over time gotten obsessed with releasing things, you know, not paying more attention to what's the reason. Like, why is my back so tight all the time? Like, you can foam roll until the cows come home, and if it's still tight, then you're really not achieving something, and you're kind of addressing the downstream effect. You're addressing the symptom and not the cause. So I think, you know, foam rolling might even be, sorry, I know my light keeps flickering back and forth. I don't know what's causing it. But I know foam rolling, it might be a thing of the past. Like, I don't really get my clients to foam roll at all, unless there is a deliberate intent for inhibition and there is a order of operations in which I would get a person to foam roll. So if a person's foam rolling their quads and it's still tight, there's probably another reason that you need to address for the muscles to still be tight.
Yeah.
And it's usually the position of the pelvis, or in respect to that.
That's sort of where I was trying to go with it, with you know, that leading into the next point about how, you know, if your posture is bad, you just gotta sort of release these tense muscles, and then boom, your posture is all good, and I can open up my range, and oh look, I can take my shoulder all the way up and down. There's no issues. Right. Like, well, okay, but what are you doing after you open up that range? Are you sort of taking steps towards strengthening that new postural position, right? Or are you just like doing it, you feel good, and then it's like, okay, I can go back to sitting like with my shoulders rounded or what have you afterwards. Right? So then getting into that next point about a couple of the myths surrounding posture, that there is one posture that's right for everybody. Like, we should all try. Everybody is whatever shape, but we want to fit everyone in a rectangle. Right. So, and you already kind of talked about that, and you said, look, structural differences are going to be different across the board, and you need to address every client's needs differently after you do a proper assessment or whatever with them. And the other one is, can you change posture?
Should I address that one first? Can you change posture?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think we can all improve upon our posture. There are some postures that just will have a lot more challenging times to address. Like, if a 95-year-old woman is extremely kyphotic, I'm really only going to get so far in terms of improving that or alleviating that kyphosis just because of age and et cetera, et cetera. Can we improve upon everyone's posture? Yes, and there's probably like going to be a little asterisk beside that, because it really depends on what makes up a person's posture. You know, can we change and improve your breathing patterns? I can give you all of the appropriate stretches or exercises to strengthen, but if you still don't breathe well, if you're still breathing like this, your body is incredibly adaptable, and you're just going to revert back to that presentation, and then you'll just have that poor posture again, right? So you can improve upon it. I would address how a person breathes as well, okay, as like kind of first and foremost. And secondly, I would take into consideration what their environment or imposed demands are. You know, do you sit all day long? Do you stand all day long? And based on that, then you would want to try to attack those structures. So let's take standing, for instance. Oh, look, I have a bowl because I was eating yogurt earlier. Let me take the spoon out. So you can kind of visualize this is the pelvis, okay? So let's say maybe the hamstrings are back here and the quads are back here. Usually most people are in an interior pelvic tilt. I was eating yogurt, that's what that is. Interior pelvic tilt, okay? So the hamstrings are an important anti-gravity muscle group, okay? So the hamstrings, obviously they bend your knee, but they're also responsible for keeping your pelvis in a more of a neutral position. So if a person can't do this, right? When it comes to if they're a grocery store clerk and they stand lots, I would want to be addressing here to try to improve how well you can deal with your external environment. If you stand all day long, okay, then let's make you better at standing by addressing your proximal hamstrings and strengthening those. If a person is sitting, you know, yes, you sit, but the hips and everything is primarily in hip flexion. I would want to try to get that client to stand up periodically. So counteract all of that hip flexion with the occasional hip extension. So standing up, stretching, and then still, again, strengthening all of those hip extensor muscles, okay? Yeah, I think it would just kind of involve those basic principles, focusing on how well a person breathes, improving those mechanics, and then factoring in what their imposed demands are and strengthening that so that they can better handle those tasks and manage themselves against gravity.
Yeah. And then, so the second part to that is there such a thing as the right posture for everyone? Like, is there somebody you can look at and be like, that is the posture that we should all be aiming towards?
Well, I think what people have to strive for is neutrality. I think everybody, like you can't look at a person and say, that's how I want my posture to be. Everyone needs their posture to, like, you need to be able to attain neutral. So, like, if we take a standing example, if a person has that anterior tilt, their lumbar spine is always going to be an extension and their back is always an extension. The opposite of extension is flexion. Can a person achieve flexion? If they can, great, right? You want to be able to hit, like, having optimal movement patterns and variability to your posture, I think, is most important as well. So having variable postures, having frequent postures, and being able to achieve neutral is ideal, because the human body is reciprocal. When you're walking, you have this reciprocal action, right? So you need to be able to access all of those ranges of motion. I think that makes a more ideal posture. So we can't glorify somebody standing perfectly straight, because standing perfectly straight makes no sense, because your life is not you standing perfectly straight.
Right.
So,
a great point, for sure. And I mean, it's also it speaks to this idea, like what's his name, Dr. Stu McGill talks about this, the best posture is the one that's always changing, right?
Yes.
And there's a couple of things in that. Is that one, like, you can't just have one good, but like, I can sit up straight here, but on the inside I'm like, man, this hurts. I really just want to kind of lay back for a bit. And you know what? For a little bit, that posture can be good.
That's acceptable. Yeah.
And the other part of it is that the best posture is the one that's always changing, sort of gets you to think about, like, well, that means if my movement is limited, something is up with my posture. If I can't get into different postures and I'm always stuck in one, then I don't really have, quote unquote, good posture, because it's not allowing me to do the different things of life. Okay. Trying to stay on track here because we only have a few minutes, so what would you say, and I know we got like a couple of questions on that, so what would you say are like a couple of main questions that you would get from people about posture? Like, you talked a little bit about the kyphosis, right? I guess maybe that's one huge thing that people always came to me about, and especially about, saying about how I'm always on my phone, or my son or my daughter's always on their phone, and I'm scared about their posture, and it's just terrible posture. And sort of what are a couple of big questions around that you usually get from people?
Such a loaded, like, I can talk about this forever. I think, so a couple of main points that I would give a client in terms of how to improve posture.
Yeah.
Okay. Breathing. Like, I talk about breathing until the cows come home. What I'm trying to get a lot of clients to do right now is practice nasal breathing. Okay. So without getting too detailed, we all know stress is fight or flight, rest and digest. So either you're super stressed or you're relaxed, right? When, let's say we're sitting at the desk and we're a high stress day, your physiology will change. Don't laugh. Physiology will change. Your heart rate increases, your breathing pattern changes, and then because your breathing pattern changes, your posture changes.
Right.
Okay. So one thing I think when it comes to improving your posture is knowing how to nasal breathe. So practicing breathing with your mouth closed. Okay. When you're breathing in, it's super, super soft, slow. Less air is actually more. Believe it or not, less air is actually more is better. Breathing in so softly that the nasal hairs barely move. And then if you can keep your body relaxed as you're working at the desk, right, then you're less likely to go into that fight or flight. Therefore, you're not going to disrupt your posture into this.
Right.
Right. So I think really working nasal breathing and just rest and digest is one thing that some people wouldn't even consider when it comes to improving your posture. And second thing is moving often. This is also part of the 24-hour guidelines as set out by CSEP, Public Health Agency of Canada, is the overall 24 hours of your day should be as much movement as possible. So even if you do have to be sedentary and sit long hours, Zoom meetings and calls and conferences one after the other, stand up periodically, get a glass of water, stretch. You can stretch the chest, the neck, do everything that you gotta do. But just moving often. Try not to fall into the trap of sitting too long. I do love the phrase, even though it's obviously not literal, sitting is the new smoking, because sedentary behavior does predispose you to chronic disease. So you want to be standing up a long time. If your conference call doesn't have to be user facing, go for a walk and take it out on the headphones. Like, why not have a walking meeting? Yeah. Right? Maybe privacy issues is something there, but if you're able to, go for a walk for a meeting. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think moving often, if you do have to sit long periods, change positions. So as you were saying before, if you're sitting like this, I kind of let one leg hang off the side of the chair to let that front hip flexor kind of open up a little bit, and then I'll switch sides, I'll stand, and then I'll prop up my laptop. Like, we don't have to have a standing desk, just use some old textbooks and stand, or you can kind of make your own makeshift working area just so you can move better and you're not confined to this. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to sort of leave it off, that instead of, because you can get a lot of the questions seem to be, if I'm understanding correctly from what you're saying, a lot of the questions will always go back to, well, let's take a look at your breathing. Oh, your breathing's messed up. Of course you're going to have postural issues. Right. So instead of saying, let's knock off every postural issue, is more like, well, let's look at your breathing and let's see how that can affect the rest of everything. Because it might just be the only thing you really need to sort of focus on, right? And then move around more.
Yeah, because if you're not breathing well, if the rib cage should be expanding and contracting on inhalation and exhalation. If that is not happening, among other things, then there's going to be structural limitations to how well you move. So it only makes sense. Like, if you want to improve your posture, how do you breathe? And then my clients are like, what? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Can't you just give me,
right,
rotator cuff? And I'm like, later, definitely, because it needs strengthening because it's injured, but your breathing plays a huge part. And then the more I drill it, like, I nag my clients on this, they're like, oh yeah, it's really starts to kind of translate into their everyday life. And then that's when they see the biggest impact, because how many hours are there in a week? You breathe 25,000 times a day. Times that by 7 days a week, times that by how old you are, so that's how many, right? So the breathing needs to be addressed first, and that can take the longest for some people to break that habit. So it has to be one of the first things to address.
I have to say that hearing you say that makes me feel it makes me feel good, because look, when I first remember the first place we worked at together, and when I drew up my bio for that place, I had to put a quote. Everybody had to put like a quote for ourselves, and mine was, you need to learn how to breathe. If you can't breathe right, you can't do anything right. And I didn't know how much there was involved in that idea, right? Like, it wasn't mine. It was something I just learned, obviously, from being more and more into health and fitness. But again, as my career developed in this and the more I learned how so much is related to the breath, that in a sense, you know, maybe literally, maybe metaphorically, people forget how to breathe. Like we forget
100%.
how to breathe. It just
I
becomes
do.
all, right?
I like, but so speaking on that, like a really quick point is if you practice regular breathing, if you make a point to practice it habitually, then you'll become aware. There was a very stressful point in my life where I would just be kind of sitting there minding my own business, and then my body would all of a sudden go, like, have you ever done that?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
there, and then
Exactly what you mean.
your brain's like, hey, you're not breathing, and then it just has an involuntary response, like, right? So, and it does that because I had no idea. I had zero awareness of my breathing. So if you practice it, you will build that habitual awareness, and awareness is key, because if you're not aware, then your posture is getting so much worse, you're getting so much more stress and you don't even know. And then usually a person will hit rock bottom when it comes to an injury or something like that.
Right.
So if you build that awareness all the time, even if you just try to pay attention to it a few times a day, but consistently, you will get better at it over time. Meditation is a great way to do that, even if you just kind of keep your lips closed. There's even a new science around mouth breathing, or sorry, not mouth breathing, mouth taping.
Right.
There's a new science around taping your mouth while you sleep, and some people just can't do it because they can't breathe through their nose. That is a pretty good indication that it needs some work and that there's some sort of blockage.
Well, I think that was a very sort of fruitful discussion on how much more we could talk about this. But yeah, no, listen, thank you. Like, I know I did mine last week and sort of invited you on, so thank you for doing it this time and taking the lead.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of us on it. And thanks for everybody who joined us. We will be putting up this video for anybody who couldn't follow along the whole thing, or if anybody wants to see it again. Please reach out to both of us if you have any questions or things that you'd like to hear us talk about more or are curious about. So that's it for me. You get the last word.
I do? What? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is great. I get very giddy and excited when I talk about this stuff because we are both geeks, proclaimed. So thanks for tuning in. Have an amazing weekend. And next Friday, we are talking about health. What does it mean to be healthy?
Huge.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Huge topic. Yeah.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
You got it.
Have a great day.
Bye, everybody. See you.